long before cities rose from stone and steel, long before roads carved through mountains or ships crossed vast oceans, the land itself was alive with stories. The indigenous peoples of Australia speak of a time they call the Dreamtime, a sacred age when the world was new and everything was shaped by powerful ancestral beings. In this time, rivers were carved, mountains were raised, and creatures of the earth, sea, and sky were given their form. It was not a history written in books, but a living memory carried in the voices of elders, the patterns of songs, and the ochre-painted lines drawn across caves and cliffs. For the Aboriginal peoples, the Dreamtime was not just a past era, it was a timeless realm that coexisted with the present, binding together every stone, tree, and creature with the people themselves. To understand Dreamtime is to step outside of the Western idea of time. It is not linear, beginning at a fixed point and stretching endlessly forward. Instead, it is cyclical, eternal, a great circle in which creation and existence are interwoven. The ancestors who moved across the land in the Dreamtime did not disappear when their work was done. They sank into the earth, into rocks, rivers, and stars where their spirit still remains. To the Aboriginal peoples, these sacred places are not mere landmarks. They are living beings holding memory and power. A hill might be the resting body of a great serpent, a waterhole the place where an ancestor paused to drink, a cluster of stars the campfire smoke of spirits still watching over their descendants. Among the most powerful and widely told stories is that of the Rainbow Serpent. In many regions, it is said that the great serpent slithered across the barren land in the Dreamtime, carving valleys and watercourses with its immense body. Where it traveled, rivers flowed and life bloomed. It was both creator and destroyer, capable of bringing fertility and abundance, but also floods and punishment to those who broke the laws of the land. Children would hear these stories around campfires, not as entertainment, but as lessons. The tale taught respect for water sources, an understanding of how fragile the balance of life could be, and the sacred duty to honor the laws handed down by the ancestors. Each clan and nation across the vast continent carried their own Dreamtime stories, unique to their land and language. To the Yolngu people of Arnhem Land, the songlines mapped across the earth were like invisible pathways that connected places of spiritual significance. A songline was both geography and history, guiding travelers across deserts and coasts while keeping alive the memory of the ancestral beings who once walked there. By singing the verses in the correct order, one could trace the journey of a spirit being across thousands of miles. It was a map encoded in music, passed down through generations without ever being written. The land itself was the text and the people were its custodians. Dreamtime stories were not only about creation, but about law, morality, and survival. They explained why certain animals behaved the way they did, why some plants could heal while others poisoned, why particular ceremonies must be performed at the right time and place. A story about a greedy hunter who ignored the laws of sharing might end with him, transformed into a bird that scavenges alone. Another tale might explain how the kangaroo got its long legs, not as a fanciful myth, but as a reminder of the responsibilities humans carry to live in harmony with the natural order. These narratives were the foundation of Aboriginal law, as binding as any written code, and breaking them could bring not just social consequences but spiritual danger. What makes the Dreamtime so remarkable is its continuity. While civilizations elsewhere built temples and libraries to preserve their beliefs, Aboriginal peoples wove theirs into the very fabric of the world around them. The stars in the night sky held as much meaning as the footprints in the sand. The song of a bird could remind a person of an ancestor's journey. A stone shaped like a spear tip might mark the site of an ancient battle between spirit beings. By living within these stories, the people ensured that the Dreamtime never faded into the past. It was present in every hunt, every dance, every ritual painting on bark or skin. When outsiders first arrived in Australia, they struggled to grasp the depth of this spiritual system. To them, it looked like mythology, folklore no different from Greek or Norse legends. But to the Aboriginal peoples, it was not fiction. It was truth, a sacred reality that gave meaning to existence itself. To deny the Dreamtime would be to deny the land, the ancestors, and the very identity of the people. It was through these stories that they knew who they were, where they belonged, and how they must care for the earth that sustained them. Even now, despite centuries of disruption, many communities still tell these stories with the same reverence as their ancestors did. Around fires, in classrooms, and through modern art and song, The Dreamtime lives on, reminding us that the land we walk upon is more than soil and stone. It is a living memory. And those who listen closely may still hear the echoes of the ancestors, whispering through the rustle of the trees, the rush of rivers, and the shimmer of stars above. For in the Dreamtime nothing ever truly ends. It continues, flowing like an endless river through the hearts of those who keep the stories alive. In the heart of the Dreamtime lies not only creation, but connection, a thread that binds every living being to the land and to each other. For Indigenous peoples, identity is inseparable from country, a term that means much more than territory. Country is alive, infused with spirit, history, and law. To speak of one's country is to acknowledge the ancestors who shaped it, the ceremonies that honor it, and the responsibilities that come with belonging to it. This relationship was never about ownership in the Western sense, but stewardship, a sacred duty to care for the land as kin. The Dreamtime made it clear that humans were not rulers of nature, but part of its great web, entrusted with balance and harmony. Songlines are perhaps the most profound expression of this relationship. Imagine standing beneath a vast Australian sky, the desert stretching endlessly in all directions, and knowing that every dune, every cluster of rocks, every waterhole is not random, but part of a living map. To walk along a songline is to retrace the steps of an ancestor being, to sing their journey so that the land remembers and responds. A traveler who knows the songs can cross seemingly barren lands without fear, for the verses tell of where to find food, where water lies hidden beneath the sand, and which places demand silence, ritual, or offerings. Without pen or paper, without compass or chart, the people carried the entire continent's geography and history within their voices. A misstep in song could mean losing the path, but when sung correctly, the land itself would guide the traveler like an ancient companion. The Dreamtime also wove people together through kinship systems that mirrored the relationships of the ancestral beings. These systems were complex, regulating marriage, social roles, and responsibilities across clans and generations. A child might learn that they are descended from the emu or the kangaroo, not in the literal sense, but in a spiritual lineage that shaped their identity and obligations. To belong to a totem meant carrying respect for that creature, protecting it, and learning from its behaviors. If one's totem was the honey ant, one could not eat it, for it was like consuming a relative. These connections reinforced the Dreamtime teaching that life was one great family, and to harm one part of it recklessly was to harm the whole. Ceremony was the bridge between everyday life and the timeless realm of the dreaming. Through dance, song, body painting, and sacred objects, communities could enter into direct communication with the ancestors. When men and women painted themselves with ochre, they were not just decorating their bodies. They were becoming embodiments of the ancestral beings themselves, reenacting the sacred journeys of the Dreamtime. Corroborees, as they were often called, could last for days, filled with chanting, rhythmic stomping, and the haunting drone of the didgeridoo. These gatherings renewed the bonds between people and land, ensured fertility and abundance, and passed on knowledge to the young. Every movement, every word carried layers of meaning, connecting the dancers not just to their own ancestors but to countless generations before them. The Dreamtime stories were never static. They evolved with the land, with new experiences, with the needs of the people. An elder might tell a story in one way to a child, focusing on the moral lesson, and in another way to an adult, revealing deeper layers of law and spirituality. The stories were like rivers with many currents, always flowing but never losing their essence. This adaptability ensured that the Dreamtime was never locked in the past but always relevant, always guiding, always alive. The power of these beliefs was not only in their spiritual depth but in their practical wisdom. A story warning of a spirit that dwelled in a particular gorge might seem like superstition to an outsider, but the people knew it also served as a reminder to avoid dangerous areas prone to rockfalls or floods. A tale of an ancestor punishing those who took more than their share of fish taught sustainable practices long before the word existed. These were not mere myths but codes of survival, rooted in a profound understanding of the land's rhythms and dangers. Even in times of drought, when the red earth cracked and food grew scarce, the Dreamtime gave strength. Elders would remind the people of the cycles that had come before, of ancestors who endured and left behind lessons on how to find hidden water or forage for plants that could sustain them. Faith in the Dreamtime was faith in resilience, the certainty that the land and its spirits would provide if treated with respect. This faith was not blind, but grounded in countless generations of observation, wisdom, and communion with nature. For outsiders, it was difficult to grasp how real the Dreamtime was. To hear a story of a serpent shaping rivers might seem like fantasy, but for Aboriginal peoples, those rivers carried the serpent's spirit still. When they touched the water, they were touching the ancestor. When they climbed a sacred rock, they walked upon the resting body of a being who shaped the world. In this way, the Dreamtime was not a distant myth, but a daily reality, present in every breath, every step, every interaction with the earth. To live without it would be to drift rootless, unanchored in a world without meaning. Through the Dreamtime, the people knew who they were and where they stood in the vast order of creation. It was a knowledge passed not through books or monuments, but through memory, ritual, and the land itself. To forget the Dreamtime was impossible, for it was written into the stars, the rivers, and the very soil beneath their feet. And as long as the stories continued to be sung and danced, the Dreamtime would never end, echoing eternally in the hearts of those who walked its pathways. As the Dreamtime stories traveled across generations, they carried not only creation tales and survival lessons, but also the deep laws that governed how communities lived together. For Aboriginal peoples, law was not an external force imposed by rulers or written on scrolls. It was inherited from the ancestors, embedded in the very stories that described how the world came to be. To follow these laws was to maintain balance with the land, the spirits, and each other. To break them was more than a personal mistake. It was a disruption of the sacred order, and such disruption carried consequences not only for the individual, but for the whole community. Every story about an ancestor's triumph or punishment was a reminder of these laws, passed down so they could not be forgotten. One of the central aspects of Dreamtime law was reciprocity, the idea that everything taken must be balanced by something given. If a hunter speared a kangaroo, he could not keep it all for himself. The meat would be shared with elders, with children, and with those unable to hunt. This was not only kindness but law, reinforced by stories of greedy beings punished by spirits or transformed into animals who would forever scavenge alone. This ensured survival in harsh lands, but more importantly, it upheld the sacred principle that no one was separate from the whole. To hoard was to disrupt the flow of life. To share was to keep it moving as the ancestors intended. Marriage, too, was governed by Dreamtime law. Kinship systems, as intricate as any legal code, determined who could marry whom, ensuring that bloodlines remained balanced and communities strong. These laws were told through story. A tale of two spirit siblings who defied kinship rules might end with them being turned into stars, forever separated across the sky. To the outsider, it was myth, but to those who belonged, it was a clear teaching. Certain unions were forbidden because they broke the sacred order. To follow the stories was to follow the law, and to follow the law was to honor the Dreamtime. Punishment, when necessary, was also guided by these teachings. It was not random nor rooted in vengeance, but shaped by the understanding that the land and ancestors were watching. A person who stole or disrespected sacred sites might be ritually shamed, physically disciplined, or temporarily banished, but always with the aim of restoring balance rather than destroying a life. The stories warned what would happen if the community ignored wrongdoing. The land itself could sicken, food could become scarce, or storms could come as punishment. Thus, maintaining justice was more than social order. It was survival, tied directly to the spirits who gave the laws in the first place. Dreamtime stories also defined gender roles and ceremonial responsibilities, though never in the rigid sense that outsiders might assume. Men and women each had sacred duties, often linked to particular ancestor beings and totems. Certain stories were for men only, others for women, and still others for children who were learning their place in the cycle of life. This division was not about inequality, but about balance. Just as the land needed dry and wet seasons night and day, it also needed men and women to fulfill their distinct but equally vital responsibilities. In ceremony, these roles were enacted with precision, ensuring that the ancestral patterns remained strong and unbroken. One of the most powerful elements of Dreamtime law was respect for sacred places. Every community knew the sites where ancestor beings had left their mark. A mountain might be the resting place of a great warrior spirit, a cave the shelter of a creator figure, a waterhole the dwelling of a serpent. These were not places to be visited casually. They required ritual, silence, offerings, or avoidance altogether. A story might tell of a man who ignored these rules, drank from a forbidden pool, and was swallowed by the Rainbow Serpent. To the people, this was not exaggeration. It was a warning, for the spirits were still present and their power still real. These places carried immense significance, not only as spiritual centers but as reminders of law itself, written into the land by the ancestors. Even the stars carried Dreamtime law. The night sky was a canvas alive with story, mapping out lessons and responsibilities. The emu in the sky, traced not by stars themselves but by the dark dust between them, taught when the birds would lay their eggs, guiding the people's seasonal practices. The seven sisters, known across many nations, carried tales of pursuit, kinship rules, and the importance of respecting boundaries. Looking up at the heavens was like reading a sacred text, each constellation a reminder of how to live and when to act. In this way, the Dreamtime stretched from the earth beneath their feet to the sky above their heads, an endless law book written across the universe. For those raised within this worldview, life was not fragmented into separate parts, spiritual, legal, natural, personal. It was all one. To live well was to live in accordance with the Dreamtime, honoring the ancestors, caring for the land, and respecting the bonds of community. The stories made these laws unforgettable, embedding them in memory through vivid images of serpents, stars, birds, and spirits. Each tale was a mirror reflecting the choices people faced in their own lives, reminding them always of the path that led to harmony and the dangers of straying from it. This unity of story, law, and land is what gave Dreamtime its enduring strength. It was not dependent on temples, kings, or written texts that could be lost or destroyed. It lived in the people themselves, in their voices, their dances, and their unbroken connection to country. And as long as the stories were told, the laws remained alive, ensuring that the sacred order of the world set down in the Dreamtime would never be forgotten. Across the vast continent, the Dreamtime was not uniform but as diverse as the lands it shaped. Every nation, every clan carried its own stories, songs, and ceremonies, each one tied to the features of its country. What the desert people sang of under the burning sun was different from the tales of those who lived by the sea. Yet all were threads of the same great tapestry. To understand the Dreamtime fully is to see this diversity, for it reveals how deeply the ancestors wove themselves into every corner of the land, leaving no place untouched by spirit. In the arid deserts of Central Australia, the stories were often about survival in harsh landscapes where waterholes were life itself. The Arrernte people, for instance, told of caterpillar ancestors who tunneled through the earth, leaving behind the ridges and gullies of the MacDonnell Ranges. These stories were not only sacred narratives but maps, reminding people where to find water, shade, and safe passage. The caterpillars themselves were more than food. They were totems, living reminders of the beings who had shaped the land and left it in the care of their descendants. To disrespect the caterpillars or their habitats would have been unthinkable, for it was a betrayal of both law and ancestry. Far to the north, in Arnhem Land, the Yolngu people carried songlines that stretched across land and sea. Their Dreamtime stories often featured the ancestral spirits who traveled between islands, bringing languages, ceremonies, and kinship rules. For them, the sea was not a barrier but a sacred highway connecting clans across vast distances. The stories were performed in rich ceremonies filled with painted bark designs and intricate dances, each movement echoing the journeys of spirit beings. To outsiders, these performances might look like art or entertainment, but to the Yolngu they were acts of renewal, ensuring that the world remained in balance. Along the coastlines, stories often centered on the power of the ocean and its creatures. In some traditions, dolphins were said to be ancestors who guided fish toward the shore, helping the people to feed their families. Sea turtles carried stories of journeys and transformation, their annual nesting serving as reminders of cycles that tied people to both land and sea. The tides themselves were explained through tales of moon spirits, their waxing and waning pulling the waters as a reminder of cosmic law. These stories carried practical knowledge: when to fish, when to gather shellfish, when to travel the coast safely, while also affirming the sacredness of the sea. Even the lush rainforests of the Northeast held their Dreamtime stories, filled with beings who lived in the shadows of giant trees and waterfalls. Here, stories often spoke of spirits who controlled rain and thunder, warning people of the dangers of disrespecting sacred sites. Certain trees were said to be the resting places of ancestor spirits, and their wood could not be cut without proper ceremony. To ignore these rules risked illness, misfortune, or the anger of the spirits themselves. In this way, the Dreamtime wove morality into the very fabric of daily life, ensuring respect not only for ancestors but for the living environment. The Dreamtime also explained the origins of animals and plants in ways that reflected local ecology. Among the Noongar people of the Southwest, stories told of the Waggle, a great serpent spirit who carved rivers and left behind freshwater sources. The rivers were more than physical lifelines. They were embodiments of the Waggle itself, and to pollute them was to attack the ancestor directly. In the Torres Strait Islands, stories spoke of sharks and dugongs, creatures central to island life, their behavior explained through ancestral events that taught respect for balance in hunting. These variations across the continent showed how flexible and rich the Dreamtime was, adapting to every landscape while still carrying the universal message of connection and respect. Yet despite this diversity, certain themes echoed everywhere. The Rainbow Serpent appeared in many forms across countless nations, always tied to water, fertility, and law. The Seven Sisters story, known in Western astronomy as the Pleiades, was told in different languages and details across the continent, but its essence remained the same: a tale of pursuit, kinship rules, and the importance of respecting boundaries. These widespread stories suggest deep cultural links stretching back tens of thousands of years, evidence of how ancient and enduring the Dreamtime truly is. Outsiders who first heard these stories often assumed they were just myths, fragmented and inconsistent across regions. But for the Aboriginal peoples, the diversity was not contradiction. It was truth expressed through the lens of each country. Just as a river changes shape as it flows through different lands, so too did the stories shift, carrying the essence of the ancestors while adapting to the needs and environment of each community. To the people, this was a strength, not a weakness, for it ensured that every part of the land had its own voice in the great chorus of creation. This tapestry of stories also reinforced the interconnectedness of all communities. A traveler moving from one region to another could hear a familiar ancestor story told in a different way, linking them to strangers through shared spiritual lineage. The Dreamtime was not confined by borders. It was a vast, living network that stretched across deserts, mountains, rivers, and seas, binding all peoples into one ancient story of creation and responsibility. And through this unity, the Dreamtime reminded every person that they were part of something far greater than themselves, something eternal and unbroken, flowing like a song across the land. To truly understand the depth of the Dreamtime, one must step into the ceremonies that brought these stories to life. For the Aboriginal peoples, ritual was not a performance for outsiders or a display of culture. It was a sacred act, a living bridge between the present and the eternal. Each ceremony was a way of keeping the Dreamtime alive, of calling forth the ancestors and ensuring that their power continued to flow through the land and the people. Without ceremony, the stories would be only words. With ceremony, they became reality, shaping the world anew with every song, dance, and painted line. From the moment a child was born, ceremony marked their journey. The first smoke rituals performed to cleanse and protect were not symbolic gestures but direct interactions with the spirit world, asking the ancestors to bless the new life and guide its path. As children grew, they listened to the stories told by elders, and when the time was right, initiation ceremonies introduced them to deeper layers of Dreamtime knowledge. These were not casual events. They were long, demanding, and sacred, involving seclusion, teaching, and rites that tested the young person's readiness to carry the responsibilities of adulthood. Through song, dance, and instruction, the initiates were connected to their totems, their ancestors, and the laws of their people, becoming part of the unbroken chain stretching back to the Dreamtime. Dance was central to these ceremonies. Every movement, every gesture carried meaning, echoing the journeys of the ancestor beings. When men stamped their feet in rhythm, they were retracing the footsteps of spirits who had walked the land at creation. When women swayed and sang, they were giving voice to the mothers of the Dreamtime, calling forth fertility and renewal. The body was painted with ochre in sacred patterns, transforming the dancer into the being they represented. To the watching community, this was not make-believe, it was presence. The ancestor was there, moving again through the dancer, reminding the people of who they were and the laws they must keep. The didgeridoo, with its deep, resonant drone, carried the voice of the earth itself, while clapsticks kept time with the heartbeat of the ancestors. Together, these sounds created a rhythm that seemed to dissolve the barrier between the human and the spiritual. The songs, passed down word for word through countless generations, were not just melodies but sacred texts. To sing them correctly was to ensure that the world remained in balance, that the rains would fall, the animals would breed, and the people would thrive. A mistake in the song was not trivial. It was a disturbance of the law, a risk to the harmony that bound everything together. Ceremonies also renewed the relationship between people and country. Certain rituals were performed only at specific sites, where ancestor beings had left their mark. To dance at a sacred waterhole was to honor the serpent who created it, ensuring that its waters remained pure and abundant. To sing at a particular rock formation was to awaken the spirit within, reminding it that the people had not forgotten their duty. These acts were not only spiritual but ecological, reinforcing sustainable practices and respect for the environment. By keeping the ceremonies alive, the people ensured that the land itself remained alive. There were ceremonies for birth, initiation, marriage, and death, each one a step in the eternal cycle. Death in particular was a deeply spiritual passage. It was believed that the spirit returned to the Dreamtime, joining the ancestors who had shaped the world. Funerary rituals helped guide the spirit safely back, ensuring that it did not linger or cause harm. Songs and dances honored the life that had passed, while also reaffirming the bonds of the living with the eternal. In this way, death was not an end but a continuation, a return to the timeless realm where all spirits came from, and to which they would all return. What made these ceremonies extraordinary was their endurance. For tens of thousands of years across shifting climates and landscapes, the people carried them forward without written texts or monuments. Memory, performance, and tradition were enough. Each new generation stepped into the same dances, sang the same songs, painted the same sacred designs, and in doing so ensured that the Dreamtime never faded. The ancestors remained present, the laws remained strong, and the people remained connected to the eternal cycle. To the outsider, these ceremonies might appear as theater, beautiful but symbolic. Yet for the Aboriginal peoples, they were acts of renewal, survival, and truth. Each ritual was both a teaching and a binding, a way of reminding the community that they were not alone but part of a sacred order that stretched back to creation itself. And so under the stars by the fire, with ochre-painted bodies and voices raised in song, the Dreamtime lived again and again, echoing through the land and ensuring that the world remained whole. The Dreamtime was not confined to the land alone. It stretched across the vast sky above, where stars, moon, and sun carried as much meaning as rivers, mountains, and trees. For Aboriginal peoples, the night sky was a living storybook, a vast canvas where the journeys of ancestor beings were etched in light and shadow. Looking upward, they saw not distant, silent points of light, but a universe alive with memory and law, reminding them of the eternal presence of the Dreamtime. The stars guided not only navigation and seasonal cycles, but also morality and identity, carrying lessons that shaped how people lived on Earth. One of the most well-known constellations in Aboriginal astronomy is the Emu in the sky, not formed by stars themselves, but by the dark spaces between them. Stretching across the Milky Way, its shape mirrored the great bird moving across the heavens. When the emu's body appeared fully in the sky during certain months, it was time to collect emu eggs, a crucial source of food. But when the emu shifted, signaling that the breeding season had ended, the stories reminded people to leave the eggs alone, allowing the next generation of birds to flourish. In this way, the Dreamtime story of the celestial emu was both a spiritual reminder and a practical guide, ensuring sustainability long before modern science coined the term. Another story told across many regions was that of the Seven Sisters, a group of stars known in Western tradition as the Pleiades. To Aboriginal peoples, these stars were sisters chased endlessly across the sky by a pursuer, often represented by Orion. The variations of the story carried moral lessons about boundaries, kinship and respect, warning against inappropriate desire or disobedience of law. To gaze upon the sisters at night was to remember these teachings, to see them not as distant suns but as living ancestors still moving above, forever reminding the people of the consequences of crossing sacred lines. across the continent. From desert to coastline, this story endured, evidence of its profound significance and ancient origin. The sun and moon, too, carried Dreamtime stories, each with their own roles in maintaining balance. In some traditions, the sun was a woman who carried a blazing torch across the sky, bringing light and warmth to the earth each day. The moon was often seen as a man, his waxing and waning cycles tied to fertility, hunting, and the tides of the sea. Their eternal chase across the heavens was more than a natural rhythm. It was the fulfillment of ancestral law, a daily reminder that order must be maintained. Ceremonies often mirrored these cycles, aligning human ritual with cosmic time, ensuring that the people moved in harmony with the universe. The Milky Way itself was seen as a great river of light, a pathway of spirits moving between the earth and the eternal Dreamtime. In some stories, it was the campfires of the ancestors glowing in the night sky, their smoke drifting upward into eternity. To children, elders would point to the stars and say, "There are our old people watching, guiding, never gone." Death was thus never final, for the ancestors remained present above, shining down each night as reminders of continuity and belonging. For travelers crossing vast deserts under starlight, the sky was not empty but filled with companions, each star a marker of law, direction, and comfort. Stories of meteors and comets added another layer of meaning. A shooting star might be seen as a spirit traveling across the sky, returning to the Dreamtime or delivering a message. Sometimes it was a warning, a reminder that the ancestors were watching and that laws must not be broken. The appearance of unusual celestial events, eclipses, comets, fiery streaks, was woven into Dreamtime teachings, reinforcing the belief that nothing in the cosmos was random. Every sign had meaning, every light was part of the eternal story. To look at the heavens was to read the messages of the ancestors, as clear and binding as the laws inscribed in the land. The Dreamtime's connection to the sky also linked directly to practical knowledge. By observing the positions of stars and constellations, communities knew when to hunt, when to gather, and when to travel. The rise of certain stars signaled the start of seasonal migrations for animals, while others marked the time for harvesting fruits or setting fish traps. The Dreamtime stories encoded this information in ways that ensured it would never be forgotten. A tale about a hunter chasing an animal across the sky was also a seasonal calendar, guiding people's actions with precision and reliability. What seemed to outsiders like myth was, in truth, a sophisticated system of astronomy and environmental science, passed down in the form of sacred story. Perhaps most remarkable was how seamlessly the sky stories connected with the earth stories. A rock formation on the ground might correspond with a constellation above, linking land and sky in a single narrative. The pathways of ancestor beings stretched not only across deserts and rivers but into the heavens, creating songlines that crossed both earth and sky. This unity reinforced the teaching that everything was connected, that to harm the land was to upset the balance of the cosmos, and to honor the ancestors on earth was to honor them in the stars. In this way, the Dreamtime was never confined to the horizon. It expanded upward into the infinite, reminding the people that they were part of a cosmos alive with spirit and law. Every night was an invitation to remember, to look up and see not emptiness but presence, not chaos but order, not myth but truth. For the Aboriginal peoples, the stars were not distant. They were kin, shining guides that kept the Dreamtime alive in the sky, just as the land kept it alive beneath their feet. When the first outsiders arrived on Australian shores, they carried with them their own ways of seeing the world, shaped by written histories, organized religions, and laws inscribed on paper. To them, the Dreamtime stories seemed like myths, primitive explanations of natural phenomena that modern science could easily replace. They could not grasp that these stories were not just tales but living truths, woven into land, sky, and people. Colonization brought not only foreign settlers but also disruption, as sacred sites were destroyed, languages suppressed, and ceremonies banned. For the Aboriginal peoples, this was more than cultural loss. It was a tearing of the fabric that connected them to the Dreamtime, an assault on the very laws that held their world together. Yet even in the face of this upheaval, the Dreamtime endured. Elders held the stories in their memory, protecting them when telling them openly was forbidden. Families continued to whisper the laws to their children, ensuring that the chain remained unbroken. In many places, ceremonies were carried out in secret, hidden from those who did not understand their sacred power. Art, too, became a vessel of resistance and survival. The ochre-painted symbols on rock faces and bark carried meanings invisible to outsiders but instantly recognizable to those who belonged. Even when lands were taken and lives uprooted, the Dreamtime remained alive in memory, voice, and spirit. The resilience of the Dreamtime lies in its timelessness. Because it is not bound to a single text or institution, it cannot be erased by the loss of buildings or libraries. It lives wherever the stories are told, wherever the songs are sung, wherever the dances are performed. In recent decades, as Aboriginal voices have fought for recognition and rights, the Dreamtime has re-emerged into public awareness. Songlines have been studied as both spiritual and geographic marvels, oral histories recognized for their astonishing accuracy in describing events such as sea level changes that occurred thousands of years ago. What once was dismissed as myth has begun to be understood as one of the oldest continuous systems of knowledge in the world. Art has become one of the most powerful ways the Dreamtime speaks in the modern world. Aboriginal dot paintings, with their intricate patterns and layers, often depict the journeys of ancestor beings, sacred landscapes, and totemic stories. To the uninitiated, they may look like abstract designs, but to those with the knowledge, each dot and line carries meaning, connecting to stories that stretch back tens of thousands of years. These paintings are not mere decoration but acts of storytelling, carrying the Dreamtime into galleries, homes, and hearts across the globe. In this way, the Dreamtime continues to teach, reaching people far beyond its original custodians. Performance, too, remains central. Corroborees are still held, both within communities and as cultural sharing with the wider world. The sound of clapsticks, the drone of the didgeridoo, and the powerful dances remind all who witness them that the Dreamtime is not a relic, but a living force. For young Aboriginal people, participating in these ceremonies is a way of reclaiming identity, of stepping into the eternal cycle their ancestors began. For outsiders, it is a chance to glimpse the depth of a worldview that sees land, sky, and spirit as one. The Dreamtime also continues to guide ecological practices. Traditional fire management, often referred to today as cultural burning, is rooted in ancient knowledge passed down through Dreamtime stories. These controlled burns, carried out with care and timing, maintain the health of the land, prevent devastating wildfires, and ensure the renewal of plants and habitats. Science has only recently begun to acknowledge the wisdom embedded in these practices, showing that Dreamtime knowledge carries insights as valuable today as they were thousands of years ago. This blend of ancient story and modern recognition shows how enduring and adaptable the Dreamtime truly is. At its heart, the Dreamtime offers something universal. Though born from the land and lives of Aboriginal peoples, its lessons speak to all who listen. It reminds us that humans are not separate from nature but part of it, that every action carries responsibility, and that stories are not just entertainment, but vessels of truth and law. In a world grappling with environmental crisis, disconnection, and loss of meaning, the Dreamtime's teachings echo with renewed urgency. To respect the land, to honor ancestors, to live with balance, these are not just Indigenous values, but human ones. Even now, elders remind us that the Dreamtime is not finished. It continues just as it always has, flowing through land, sky, and spirit. When a child learns a song, when a dancer paints their body with ochre, when a community gathers to tell the story of the Rainbow Serpent or the Seven Sisters, the Dreamtime is alive in that moment. It is not a past that has ended, but a presence that endures, eternal as the stars above and the earth beneath our feet. And in its endurance lies both the survival of a people and the gift of a wisdom the whole world can learn from, if only it listens. The Dreamtime is often described as the oldest continuous cultural tradition in the world, and its endurance is itself a story worth telling. For over 60,000 years, through ice ages, rising seas, shifting climates, and the arrival of colonizers, the Dreamtime has remained alive, unbroken, and powerful. It is not just a system of belief, but a way of seeing the world that continues to shape identity, culture, and knowledge for Indigenous Australians today. To speak of it in the past tense would be a mistake, for the Dreamtime does not belong only to the past. It exists in the eternal now, as relevant and alive today as it was when the first ancestors walked the land. Modern life has placed enormous pressures on Indigenous communities, But even in cities and towns, the stories live on. Elders continue to pass down the teachings to younger generations, often in new ways, through schools, recordings, art exhibitions, and cultural programs. Dreamtime stories are told not only around fires in remote communities but in classrooms, theaters, and digital platforms, adapting without losing their sacred core. The songlines, once known only to those who traveled by foot across deserts and forests, are now being mapped and studied, revealing the extraordinary accuracy of this oral tradition. Some songlines describe landscapes that no longer exist, such as coastlines submerged by rising seas thousands of years ago. This proves what Indigenous peoples have always known. Their stories are not myth, but memory, carried across generations with astonishing precision. The Dreamtime also continues to guide cultural revival. Young Aboriginal artists, dancers, and storytellers are reclaiming their heritage with pride, weaving traditional forms into contemporary expression. A dot painting exhibited in a gallery is both ancient and modern, carrying the same spiritual depth as the designs painted on rock walls tens of millennia ago. A hip-hop song infused with Dreamtime themes may sound different from a corroboree, but it is part of the same tradition of using rhythm and story to pass on truth. This adaptability is the secret of the Dreamtime's endurance. It is not rigid, but living, always finding new ways to speak while remaining true to the eternal law of the ancestors. For the wider world, the Dreamtime offers profound lessons. It challenges the idea that history must be written to be valid, showing instead that memory, song, and story can preserve truth for tens of thousands of years. It offers a vision of law that is not imposed by rulers but inherited from the natural world, binding humans to the responsibilities of care and respect. It teaches sustainability, reminding us that to take without giving back is to break the sacred balance that sustains life. And above all, it reveals the power of story, not as entertainment, but as the very foundation of identity, morality, and survival. Today, as Australia reckons with its colonial past and seeks reconciliation, the Dreamtime is central to understanding and honoring Indigenous culture. Acknowledging country before public events, protecting sacred sites, and recognizing the wisdom of Aboriginal land management are small but vital steps toward respecting the unbroken chain of tradition. For Indigenous peoples, keeping the Dreamtime alive is not only cultural preservation, it is survival, healing, and resistance. For non-Indigenous peoples, listening to the Dreamtime is an act of humility, a chance to learn from one of the oldest human traditions on Earth. The Dreamtime reminds us that time itself is not linear. The ancestors are not gone. They are here, in the rivers, the stars, the mountains, and the stories that echo through every generation. To walk on the land is to walk among them, to breathe. The air is to share in their presence, and to tell the stories is to renew the cycle once more. In this way, every telling, every dance, every painting is not just remembrance but creation, keeping the world in balance as it was meant to be. And so the Dreamtime continues, flowing like a great river with no beginning and no end. It carries the voices of the ancestors, the wisdom of survival, and the laws of balance that have guided humanity for longer than almost any other tradition. It is not a relic, nor a myth, nor a curiosity. It is a living truth, carried in the hearts of those who belong to it, and shared with all who are willing to listen. To hear the Dreamtime is to hear the earth itself speaking, reminding us that everything is connected, everything has meaning, and everything belongs to the great story of creation.